Executive and Artistic Director of the Shelley and Rubin Foundation. On behalf of the foundation and the 8th floor, we're thrilled to have you here in conversation with Sharon Louden, Morehshin, Allahyari, Shin, and Shinique Smith. And somehow I managed to put them in the right order in my notes. So this is on the occasion of the launch of Sharon Louden's new book, The Artist as Culture Producer. The structure of tonight's conversation will loosely center on questions of cultural representation as they relate to artistic production, community building, and the artist's role in society, reflecting on issues raised by a current exhibition, The Intersectional Self. Am I echoing a lot? No? It's just where I'm standing. Okay, cool. Maybe I'll stand right here. So before introducing Sharon, I want to give context for a few things. The exhibition, the 8th floor, the Rubin Foundation, in case you're here for the first time. And I'm really excited that this is an artist-centered conversation. I see a lot of artists here who, it's rare that we're all together, so thank you for being here. So the Intersectional Self is part of a series of shows organized by the Shelley and Rubin Foundation on themes that relate to social justice, because the foundation is committed to supporting art and social justice through grant-making, exhibitions, public programs like tonight's event, and special projects. So the exhibition that we're sitting within, in this very room, we're amongst Adrian Piper, Andrea Bowers, Martha Wilson. This exhibition examines feminism and gender at a moment when trans identity is becoming more and more common, but also continuing to evolve and change our understanding of the gender binary. It's no longer binary. So while intersectionality is often defined by the impact of oppressive identity politics, in other words, it's often defined by othering, by situations in which people are othered, the exhibition offers a perspective on multiple ways gender can be recast according to our own mode of identification as a way of connecting us through the nuanced aspects of who we are. More broadly, the foundation mission is centered on the idea that art can and should be a cornerstone of cohesive, resilient communities. That's really from a mission statement, right? And greater participation in civic life. In our mission to make art available to the broader public, in particular to underserved communities, the foundation provides support to and facilitates partnerships between cultural organizations and advocates of social justice across the public and private sectors. So then there's our grant making. In that aspect of what we do, we support New York City-based organizations engaged with cultural work that's public-facing. What is that? Public art, arts education, artistic activism, and art in the context of community and service centers in ways that expand cultural access. So for those of you who have ties to nonprofit organizations in the city, we're in the second month of an open call that closes on September 15th. So it's an open call for requests for support for 2018. If you're interested in how that works or seeing who we've supported most recently, you can visit our website, www.sdrubin.org. I also want to quickly mention that our next exhibition, which opens on June 15th, is called Voice Equals Survival. It's curated by Claudia Maria Carrera and Adrian Geraldo Saldana for Visual Aids. Visual Aids is one of our current grantees. Voice Equals Survival examines voice as a medium and metaphor used by artists and activists confronting oppression amid the ongoing AIDS, HIV crisis and epidemic. The exhibition will feature work by many more artists than I'm going to name, but it includes ACT UP, Jordan Arsenault and Poster Virus, Chloe Zubilo, Grand Fury, Andrea Geyer and Sharon Hayes, Shan Kelly, Donald Moffat, Rosa von Praunheim, and David Wojnarowicz, among others. So that's June 15th. And now I'm going to introduce Sharon. I feel like she doesn't need an introduction, right? But no. I'm still going to do it. Okay, I did reduce it a little bit.
No.
So put your hand up when you've had enough, Sharon.
Yes, no, that's it.
Sharon Louden, I am going to read a little bit about you. She's an artist, educator, advocate for artists, our favorite kind, and editor of Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, series of books including The Artist as Culture Producer, which is why we're here tonight. Louden's work has been exhibited in numerous venues, including the Aldridge Contemporary Art Museum, the Drawing Center, Birmingham Museum of Art, Wetherspoon Art Museum, and the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. Her work is in major public and private collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, National Gallery of Art, Newburgh Museum of Art, Arkansas Art Center, Yale University Art Gallery, and the Museum of Fine Arts. As an extension of her work in her studio, Louden is a senior critic at the New York Academy of Art in New York City, where she organizes a popular lecture series interviewing luminaries and exceptional individuals in the art world and from afar. So I think a lot of you know her work that way. She's also a consultant for the Joe Mitchell Foundation, Creative Capital Foundation, and her first book, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, is now in its 7th printing. So I'll just skip a few things. Her second book, The Artist is Culture Producer, launched on March 2nd. But you can find out more just www.livesustain.org. So welcome, Sharon, and welcome to the panel of esteemed artists. Sharon's going to introduce them, and then we're going to take a exposure.
So I just want to thank Sara and William for having us, and Zach also for his great help. And what I'm going to do is am I too loud, Zach? Because I'm loud, so I don't need a microphone really. But this is being recorded, so I'm going to use a microphone. I'm going to introduce these 3 exceptional women who I respect tremendously, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the reason why we're here today, a little bit, and the context of this. And then Sara's going to start, we're going to start asking some questions. We're going to do a little moderated warm-up conversation, and then we're going to leave it to all of you to ask some questions and engage in some dialogue. So I'm going to first start all the way to my left. Next to Sara is Shinique Smith. Shinique was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and she has had over 20 solo exhibitions. Her artwork has been collected and exhibited by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Brooklyn Museum of Art, Denver Art Museum, LACMA in Los Angeles, MoCA, North Miami, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and many, many others. In addition to exhibiting internationally, she's produced several monumental public art commissions for the New York Metro Arts and Transit, the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston, and the Mural Arts in Philadelphia, right? And she's doing current projects for Los Angeles Metro Authority and Chicago Transit Authority to be completed in 2018. The other thing is I was just saying this to Shinique, I just saw her work in Los Angeles, being on this tour that I'm going to talk about, in this power show, which was amazing. So if anyone gets to Los Angeles, I think it's one of the best exhibitions I've ever seen. It was phenomenal, so congratulations. She's also included in that. Awards from the Anonymous as a Woman Foundation, the Tiffany Foundation, the Joe Mitchell Foundation, and she was presented in 2012 with the Alumni Medal of Honor from Maryland Institute College of Art, where she earned her BFA and her MFA in Baltimore. Okay, is that okay? Okay, great. Okay, so are we all going to raise our hand? I'm editing through these, so. Okay, so to her right is Jean Shin, and Jean is a powerhouse. She is, that is not part of her bio, but wow, I just feel her all the time. She recognized she's so generous. These 3 women are very generous, so they would never be sitting next to me. She's recognized for her site-specific installations that transform everyday objects into elegant expressions of identity and community engagement. Her work has been widely exhibited in places such as Museum of Modern Art in New York, Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, Smithsonian, Washington, D.C., Scottsdale Museum in Arizona, and the Crow Collection in Dallas. She's accomplished many things in the public art realm, including the 2nd Avenue subway and the 63rd Street station. Is everybody familiar with that? Amazing. Yeah. She just completed that. When was that completed?
2016.
Wow, amazing. She's received numerous awards, including the two NIFA fellowships and Korea Arts Foundation of America award, Paul Krasner Grant, Asian Cultural Council, and also Tiffany Foundation. And both of them went to Skowhegan as well. I forgot to mention that. Jean was born in Seoul, Korea, and raised here, and she received her BFA and MS from Pratt Institute, where she also teaches. Interesting. Morehshin Allahyari is sitting next to me to my left. She's an artist, activist, educator, and occasional curator. Interesting, I didn't know that. Oh yeah, you did, you obviously from the essay. They're all in my book. She was born and raised in Iran and moved to the United States in 2007. She thinks about technology as a philosophical tool set to reflect on objects and as poetic means to document our personal collective lives and struggles in the 21st century. Her work has been part of numerous exhibitions and many publications of future work, including the New York Times, Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, NPR, Reisman, Vice, and Al Jazeera. She's currently an artist resident in IBEAM's one-year research residency, which is fantastic. And then what was the solo exhibition you had where I saw your work? In Brooklyn.
At Transfer Gallery, right?
Yes. So she just had a solo exhibition there. Okay, so thank you all for being here, and thank you, Sara. So I'm just going to quickly just give you an overview of why I came to Sara with this idea of coming here, and I'm so grateful because I've been following Sara for a long time. I brought her to the New York Academy of Art because I think she's a thought leader and very important for artists. And for me, I feel like a book is a platform for conversation. So in 2011, I was approached to write a book, and I can't write very well. So I can't even write an artist statement. So it's horrible struggle. So I told my publisher, I don't really want to write a book. And she said, what would you want to do? And I said, I'm frustrated because I don't believe that artists share enough and make their own opportunities. So I would like to have a book that has 40 artists who can at least start a conversation about how to sustain a creative life. And so that book then went to 18 countries, 62 stops on a book tour, and as Sara said, it's in the 7th printing, which is remarkable. And I have to introduce two people in the audience who were in that first book. Eric Hansen. Will you sign books for this? And Austin Thomas, who's in both of these books. So my publisher in the middle of the tour said, I think you should do a second book. Of course they're going to ask me that question to do a second book, ask me to do that. And so I said, okay, great, I want to do a second book. What I found in that first book was that the public still doesn't know who we are as artists and how we give to the general economy, and then also the assets that we just give to society and contribute to the well-being of others. And so I really had trouble with the idea of, I'm unsettled with the fact that they still don't know this. And then artists, on the other hand, still believe in very traditional ways of sustaining a creative life. And I think that also conversation needs to be broader. So my first book, I felt that it should be sustainable in some measure. So the first book, all of my books, the royalties are split with all of the contributors equally. But the checks are very small. Our first check was $10.04, and then they don't get much higher than Eric, you're gonna get a check in Austin for $18.04. We just got our check this year. But that's not the point. In publishing, that doesn't happen. Anthologies, people are never paid. So I want to change that trajectory of publishing and how that can happen. Also, all of the artists get their own copyright for their essays, so they're published authors. In this book, I wanted this tour to be 100% sustainable. So at every stop, every artist is paid to talk. It's very important. Except for, so we're going to have 99 stops, it looks like, on this tour. This is the 34th stop on this tour. So, I think I'm a little tired already, but I think what's happening is that we've raised over $190,000 for this tour to pay artists and bring them all over the world. We were just in Australia, and the idea is to have cross-pollination between the artists that we bring forward and the audience, but also to have a documented conversation about what artists need. And then also to give back to every venue. This is being recorded. This will be part of a case study that will be published after the tour is has concluded. I spoke with the NEA about that last year when I worked with them on a big report, and I'm not sure if it's going to be able to be published with them based on what's happening in this culture, but I do want them or another foundation. The Ford Foundation gave me a very generous grant to go to marginalized communities. I'll probably go back to them too and ask them to disseminate this information worldwide. So I think the only other thing I would say is that every venue for me, part of this tour is too that it's under the big umbrella of context, so that every venue that is on my website stays on that website for 2 years and then advertised as a movement, because basically it has become that, because at every stop I have outcome, which has been amazing. Artists are doing things from conversations with other artists, and then they stay in touch with those artists, and then they stay in touch with contributors as well, and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's what's really important to me. So this recording will be given to the Rubin Foundation, and they can do whatever they want with that, and it will be unedited, and then, like I said, it will be published. So thank you for having me. That's the short answer, and it was very lengthy. And we have books here for sale, so which will also go back to the Rubin Foundation. Oh, thank you. Or contributors, thank you.
Thank you. Do I ask a question now?
Yes.
Sorry, the discussion is starting. So, like, if you're talking about context, you must have, Sharon, a very, like a massive network of artists that you're involved with. And so you have 40 artists in this current book. How did you decide who to work with? How did you go about that?
So for this, thank you for that question. For this book, it went from, my vetting went from 400 artists to 40. I learned from doing the first book, which I didn't vet very well for that, and there were 2 artists who shall remain nameless, who weren't the same people in the book as they were on stage, and they were a little Debbie Downers for me, because I think you can relay truth in a positive way, and they didn't do that. So this time I really had to vet people for their generosity, also having a leg in the commercial art world, or selling their work, or not selling necessarily, that doesn't, I don't mean it that way, I'm sorry, being in a position where it's more in the art market, in white walls, let's put it that way, and then having a bridge to the public. So those were, and then there were a little bit other different criteria. I wanted to be much more inclusive and diverse, and I wanted to also be people who are not only generous with what they say in their words about their life, but also actually givers to communities.
So in a way, it sounds like you had several layers of criteria. One was that the artist had a sustainable practice.
Yeah.
In the sense that there was some relationship in the market and other parts of the world, or other art worlds. But then also that as a community, there's a sense of sustainability in that, right?
Yeah, and exactly, and actually for this book, half the artists I didn't know very well. So I didn't know Morehshin and Shinique in Eugene for many years, but I felt confident in reaching them based on what I learned about them in my research. So it was a way of creating community, basically.
So I guess do you want to ask the next question?
Whatever you think. What do you think? I've been talking too much, actually.
Okay. I'm just going to say that there are some seats in the front for people who are standing. If you want to sit down, you're welcome to. So this isn't, I mean, we don't need to talk about this exhibition in particular, but I think that this is a year when, this year, we've come off an election which was largely about gender, right, to some degree. And so if we think about gender and equity and sustainability, I'm going to start with the second question, which is, how do you envision equity in the world and or the art world? And I'm going to ask this in a few different ways so you can choose which part of the question you want to address. And I think there are different ways this could go. We can talk about visibility, we can talk about the market, like are you able to sell work? Do you get paid? Or a sense of equal opportunity, which, you know, maybe a few years ago sounded out of date, but we know it isn't now. not to be a downer. But it's out there. So we're sharing free microphones so that we don't have a crash of sound up here. So if anybody wants a microphone. Yeah.
So maybe I'll address the worlds that we see that's equitable, right? So I do kind of feel like for me, access is one of the first steps, and whether it happens from the artist's point of view, but really as an educator I see, and as a mother I see, access to the arts happening from childhood, right? So we first need to educate our children about the importance of arts because they become citizens. A world that I would find is the place I want to be in the future. One that is getting harder and harder to maintain and sustain. So I do think about equality and what does our future hold, you know, and I would love my imagined equity perfect world to be reflecting, you know, our population, period, in the world, and it doesn't. So right now, the art world has a long way to go, and I would particularly aim at the devicelessness and the institutional critique of museums and galleries and who they support. I was just looking at the Guerrilla Girls, thinking about your exhibition, you know, and how I grew up with those activist posters, and we would call them out, you know, and say, how many people, like women shows have you had, you know, like said MoMA, Whitney, and it would be like 0, 0, 0, 1. You know, this is 1985. I printed it out because it was so astonishing. And then they had an anniversary 30 years later, 2015. It was like 1, 1, 0, 2. 30 years.
Yeah.
So it really hasn't changed, you know. So when I think about like the public, you know, our audience is going to see museums, and then that's what they see reflected. So little of us, you know. That's what I think needs to change. And we can unpack like why is that happening and where does it start? It's not just the museums that are at fault.
That's such a great point, Jean. The word equality, I think, is such a loaded word that can be defined in so many different ways, and empirically and individually, as far as what we believe. And you know, what you just said is 30 years later, and it's not that much equal, and that's just for women in general in our world. I listened to a question, and I wonder if I believe in equality anymore. And I'm not trying to be a downer either. I just wanted to be honest with myself, because I feel like this is a conversation we have had as a society for a long time. Like, what does equality mean?
Right.
And I feel like the constant defining of it, and it's the same definition, mostly, but not making it happen. Right. So it's kind of like, how do we make it happen? And one way, I think you're right, it's not just, it's institutionally, education-wise, but that even education is so loaded. I mean, who are the teachers? What are they teaching? You know, who are the students? Access, inclusivity. For me as an artist, one of the dream, because you use the word like a dream world, a dream equity world, and I was thinking, yeah, it would be a dream world, because at some point, maybe it's not wholly realistic to subscribe to that as an ideal, because people aren't ever going to be really equal in this dualistic society. Someone's always going to be on top, and someone's always going to be in the middle and lower. But as far as access and, I think, context, for me, I feel that one little thing, like not having to justify what I do and why I do it, in the same manner as other people don't have to. You mentioned, I don't want to talk about any shows in particular, but there was a show recently that though on the outside it has this huge inclusivity to it, and I feel like I wasn't treated in that same manner. That I'm asked to justify myself even more so, but in other big group shows you're not. I mean, that are organized over a theme of just general blackness, and so what is blackness? You know, and then there's this whole thing about, sorry, that's a whole other thing. As being asked to define blackness and constantly, why do we have to define it?
Right, and it's also a question of,
Sorry.
there's so much more streets and space in it, but to have to justify part of what you're doing is you're doing emotional work with people who don't understand, or who maybe lack knowledge about the work you're doing and why.
Right, and I don't blame it on those people. I just want to,
but there's extra work that you're doing. That's what I'm doing.
Right, there's extra work.
Right.
But part of that goes back to education and what's taught.
Sometimes the microphone's cut out. Just
And what's not.
Right.
But I don't want to end my little, tangent on a negative note. I mean, it's still positive. I feel like there's more access for me than there were for older artists, several generations ago. And it continues to improve, though in very, very small increments.
Morehshin.
Yeah, is this on?
Yeah, you just have to hold this, don't touch that.
I'm not touching it. So yeah, I think, all these things are so complicated, and it's something that I constantly think about and reflect and talk to my, other friends about it. I think there's diversity, there's universality, and then equality, right? And then these three get based on the situations, and then the context and the way you're invited to something, and the kind of emotional work that you have to put into things, all those things then can change, and then you just have to find, I guess, your space in them, and then how you react to them and how you deal with them. So yeah, it's very complicated. I think one thing that I have thought about a lot back and forth in the last years is that, obviously if there's a white male panel, I'm the one that would be complaining about it and being like, this is not okay, I'm not going to participate in this if you only have men in this panel, and I'm going to resist that. But at the same time, it's a part of this is also about, feeling like you're being exoticized, and then you're just there's a thing that people want to just check off the list. So they're like, oh, we got the Middle Eastern artists here, so this is good. We can be politically correct. So how do you deal with that, and where is the space that you then feel like you're like, yes, I want to be a part of this, but at the same time, maybe if I'm part of this, and if I'm sitting here as that, let's say, white male panel, then I'm going to talk about also that, the very fact that I'm the only person, and what does that mean in that context. So there's that, and also for me, I think one thing that I have thought about a lot is, I think this problem with diversity and its relationship to universality, that whole thing of universal feminism. There's not such a thing. And I think we have to update actually the very concept of universality in that way, And then that's when we can change those futures. We can change those contexts. Because as long as things are just being read and thought and understood in that way, as long as people still get very excited about the Women March that is mostly still white women, and but it comes as this universal getting a unity thing, unity for who, and whose march is this for? But we all get really wrapped up in this stuff very quickly, and then we just forget that critical perspective to it. And I just think I've always gone back and forth trying to interrupt those spaces, to look back, to interrupt myself also, and my comfort zone in that relationship. So yeah, all those things are important.
I love listening to that.
So I think just as a kind of add-on to that question, in terms of opportunity, for a lot of people there's a sense of scarcity, right? So opportunities are few and far between, and so the idea, how does sustainability this is maybe too loaded a question, but if you're thinking about equity and sustainability, what about the competitive nature? Like how can, and what I'll do is try to ask this constructively because it matters what question you ask, right? Or how you frame the question. I'll frame it this way by saying, what are ways that you can balance out the effects of competition in the work that you do and the way that you work with people?
We've been saying on this tour, and so the makeup of it is like this, where we engage in a conversation with different people. And sometimes there are people who are from local artists in different communities, in addition to people who are from the book or otherwise. And that's come up actually quite a bit. But I actually try not to think in a naive way that there is, quote, competition, because when you think about competition, it then means that there's only a few slots for relatively, for very few people. But sometimes the universe has a different plan for every artist. And so I think the problem with sometimes artists is that they try to fit a square into a circle and they never can get there. And they're stuck on it. Like they apply for the same things over and over again and never get them. And they can't see who's around them to create their own opportunities to try to get out of that. So I actually don't think, I think if anything, if people feel that they're competitive, they should branch out of it and do other things. And I think that the people in this book, and then also all the other 360 people that I vetted for this book and who are out there, they're creating their own opportunities. And I think we sort of have to do that right now because there's not enough in the market to satisfy everybody. And I just want to add too that sometimes the market can be very disappointing once you get there. Like you alluded to that, right? With Shinique, when having an exhibition and then it may not be all peaches and cream or rosy, or that it may not be where you're treated very well or as significant as it appears on the outside. And that's the same with sometimes getting a grant. It only lasts for a certain amount of time and then it's over. And so I think that there's a problem in thinking about that competition. I don't really think that there should be, but it's human nature that there is.
Do any of you want to respond to that?
I might say maybe the competition may be an awkward word, but I do think aiming for our own ambition and excellence and our ideas of success are embedded for sure in how I think of my sustained career, because I'm not going to be satisfied, right? So that's, and it's competitive, right, in our world, so I get that. So the world may be competitive. I may not want to compete at that arena, but I have to somehow navigate through it, right? So I would maybe say the opportunities are, how do I change the ground plane in which we're playing, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, if I see a competition and I see and finally meet the panelists, I look at who they are. Of course they didn't choose me. So then I have to say, well, I'm going to volunteer, make myself available to serve on a panel, which keeps me out of my studio. Then I have to show up and make these decisions, and I have to convince people that there's some unfair process going on and call them out on why, So at the end, I serve on a lot of selection panels, and people know to call me because I always say yes, and it's really convenient. But I do it. I learn so much from it, and I get to meet colleagues, and I feel like my voice as an artist, a woman, a person of color, changes the dynamics of the panel, and I believe that. And the outcomes are different, and I believe that too. And so I change the competition because I present new winners, I feel like, by doing that. And so in that way, it comes back, right? If they win, they'll be asked to compete, and then be asked to sit on selection panels and serve.
Right,
and I just feel like we all have to serve, I'm on, I serve on boards for the same reason, change the dynamics, change the conversation, right? So it's not that we're competing, it's just that we're sharing the spot. So if you get the spot, and even if you don't get the spot, I've been, we've said many things where it goes to someone else.
Right.
That's how we learn, right? And it has gone to so many times someone else. We've learned that, and we've said, well, what do I have to do to change this? I can't compete better. I've got to change the ground plane in which the competition is set because it's all wrong.
But can I add something in relationship to that? I think like one very specific thing about like if you immigrate to another country, right, and like English is not your first language, you come from like a very different kind of education. I mean, I've always felt like I had to work extra for like applications, for like every single thing that, I mean, it's about privilege in that way also, right, for like, and the dominant kind of like, you live in this country, then you have to know certain things and you have to familiarize yourself with certain knowledge or certain process that would be like very different from like your education system in Iran that you come from, you know? I mean, I feel like when I moved in 2007, like certain things just like went to zero and I just had to restart many things in a way that I had like spent 23 years of my life like building this whole thing that like meant nothing as soon as I moved here. You know, so then how do you deal with that? And that's just how it feels, that you're like always putting extra effort and work to like get to certain things, but then there's like very real kind of glass ceiling situation where then you know that you can't reach after like certain things, like to get a certain position that, I don't know, maybe like a white male person would get easily, you had to like, maybe you can never get that as easily, and like you have to work extra because of all the cultural, social, again, like complications around that, right? So yeah, I think specifically when you immigrate to a place, that relationship between competition and what you have access to and how you can get those opportunities gets complicated and like requires much more effort.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I could comment on that. Competition.
Yeah.
I think Gina Morehshin had a point about, and I'm going to use a paraphrase, reinvention and changing the playing field for yourself. I would also add that, and Sharon touched on this for a second, about applying for the same thing over and over again. How you get 12 times, you know, that kind of thing. When it's a limitation that sometimes we place on ourselves, that there's this preconceived notion of success and what that equals, that we keep trying to do, and instead of stopping and wait a minute, maybe some other things might make me happy, maybe I'm better suited to another environment. Maybe the universe or karma's trying to tell me that going to Skowhegan would really mess me up. You know, I'm using that as an example because I have friends who are wonderful artists who have applied to that residency in particular over and over again and not gotten in. That doesn't mean that they're bad artists. There are other places for them to go. There are other residencies in the world, and one thing isn't going to set you up for the rest of your life. So I think it's being open-minded and really honest within ourselves. And as far as other artists in competition, competing with ourselves and letting the negative things go to the wayside.
I just want to say too that I love what you said about ambition, because I think that's the driver, really. And I think after a while too, your head against the wall, the same wall over and over and over again. You got to do something else, right? So I think ambition is really, really important in this, and being aware of it and embracing it, especially as women. Which, can I lead into that first question? So the question I had was, so in regard to feminist identity, as women, as artists, how do you think that, what do you think about the current status of women artists? Are we thriving as a collective, do you think? Are we sustaining our lives and making a dent in regard to the market? And I say this too selfishly because I'm thick in the middle of my third book, which is Last Artist Standing, Artists Over 50, and 2/3 of them are women in this book, and the 1/3 are mostly men of color. So, and how is our work being matched to those of men? And I actually hate that I wrote that, really, but it's perceived that way in the market, which I think is wrong, because we're a different collective than, I mean, clearly we're a different gender, right? No, what do you think, Sarah?
There are multiple genders.
Yes, multiple genders,
I mean, when I
right?
think about the match, like I think what you're asking is how are we compared?
Yeah.
How are women artists compared to male
Right.
counterparts? And I don't have a real handle on the market full disclosure, that I ran the Percent for Art program for the city, New York City, for 6.5 years. And in that context, yeah, there were often moments when people would really want to focus on the identity of the artist. Say you have 4 finalists presenting to a panel. Jean was part of some of those panels, at least a few, while I was there, and she was doing some commissions. So you have these moments when the identity of the artist almost becomes the most important thing in reverse. So it's a reverse. I think I don't have a microphone. I do now. Okay. Okay, that's okay. So I'm kind of ambulating, but I think that there's sometimes a problem where there's an an overly laborious attempt to be inclusive and to say, we're doing a commission in the Bronx. Of course we need the Latin American artist and not the artist that lives in the Bronx, right? And you're like, it's a Cuban artist who has no relationship to the neighborhood, right? And so there are these situations where the identity is understood in a totality. And I don't think that, I think that applies differently in the marketplace but I actually don't know. I mean, I don't react to artwork that way. Like, I like the idea that we can look at an artwork and not think about who made it, but I do recognize that we're living in a time when it does matter who made it, right? Because that is part of the story of the artwork and part of its impact. That's my answer.
Do you want to say that?
I mean, and that's broader than gender, but it's still essentialism.
I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about that complication, that yes, it feels like very good to feel like you're all part of this collective, and then it's like we're all feminists and women, and we're working all together toward this goal. But at the same time, again, that's the problem, because your voice then gets reduced to certain things, and I think that reduction is a problem. And that very idea of, again, goes back to that idea of universality, right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't connect with some concerns that someone from a certain specific background might have, and the same way for someone else, right? So this is why I think this is such an important moment to think about worlds and futures rather than one future. Right. And I think that's something we have to embrace, right? I mean, one thing I've been saying is that my nightmare is to live in the future of Elon Musk, right? And that's a future that is the future of Elon Musk. That's the future that is the most encouraged and promoted, and I think that's my nightmare.
Can you explain that a little bit? Some people didn't quite hear what you said.
Yeah, I was saying I don't want to live in the future of Elon Musk, because I think that future is so limited. It's so limited to who Elon Musk is as a person, and I think this is a very important time to think about worlds and futures rather than one world. And again, this goes against that idea of universality. We don't need one universe, and we don't need one world. That we should encourage that, actually. And for me, that is very important. It's something that my work, this new research I'm doing, is all around that, building these little things that is not a common space, right? So, that's where I am with this.
I might say that sometimes I get an email on my website that says, Dieu Monsieur Jean Chin. And oftentimes in the art world, they go, where's the artist? And they walk right past me, look past me to go to see my work. They just assume that the person who made this work, large-scale installation, public art, is male.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that all the time with my name also, because people don't know if it's, but they'll mostly assume that I'm a man if they don't know gender. So.
Right, so that goes a long way in perception and visibility. Here I am, the creator of the work, all the works that I've done, and if you just bring in an art audience, if they like the work, they assume I'm Jean. There was I'm going to pause and let you.
Thank you, Sharon. Hardships and weird times that we find ourselves in, I do feel that women are thriving a little. Can you say a little bit of thriving? A little bit. I think it's a good time to be a woman, and and in our world especially. I think it's sometimes these difficulties highlight areas that begin to thrive. Because people, will thrive despite what's happening and rise up and come together, and there's more gumption because there's like a common, not threat, but common negative thing, force to go against. And so people rise to the occasion, and I think there are a lot of women who are, and organizations who are, and banding together and doing good, so there's some thriving.
I might also add that the thriving, I feel that, and partly because maybe I'm very motivated in the sense of wanting what we're thriving about to change, right? So I think as artists, I do define myself, as a woman artist, because for me, the notion of feminism has changed. And I want it to continue to change and be redefined, by myself, by my peers, by my elders, by my students, And so I think we're thriving in that way because we're growing and we're changing and we're learning from each other, So I think there's a groundswell happening for sure with women and artists, And in my life, I feel like being an artist and also taking on motherhood, it's like I'm redefining what motherhood is and redefining what an artist is. All of those things come to play and shaping, the notions and definitions that preceded me. And we could be all wrong, but I feel that we're coming together. The feeling and the perception is real.
Can I add to that though? I mean, you have a lot of rainbows that just came right out of your halo from you. Just saying that. I do agree with that too. However, in the research for this book that I'm doing, you'd be amazed about how many women don't want to reveal their ages. It's very interesting. And I can't work with them. And then they don't transcend through generations.
You say you can't work with them because
they won't reveal their ages. They're not proud of their ages. That's part of the work I'm doing. But also, I think I just saw Susie from. Is she there? She can hear me. So Susie from the Creative Capital. So the work I do for Creative Capital, 2/3 of women who, 2/3 of the people who take professional development are women over 50. So there's significant problems in our community, artistic community as a collective. And I do think you three, as being so powerful, we owe it to ourselves to be able to shake some of these women and say, hey, you got to snap out of this. Because that's the frustration that I feel, as even though we are thriving and we've come much further, I think we have a long way to go, unfortunately.
But I also think, like Morehshin mentioned the Women's March, and there was a lot of, let's say social media murmurs about and critique about like who's at the march. And some of that was hard. I didn't go to the march, I was very ill. But I also, like, some people don't participate for different reasons, right? But I think it's important that there's space for that conversation, and the fact that we know about it means that like there are more perspectives in the conversation. So maybe that's too optimistic, but it's part of the process, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I wasn't in the US, so I didn't participate. I would participate if I was. Like, I wouldn't reject it as something, right? So, but at the same time, one thing was that, like, imagine the same march with the same number of women, and if they were brown and black women mostly, how would actually the government respond to that, right? Like, because then
would it be a march? Would it be a protest? Would it be
exactly
something else?
And like, would it be taken in the same way and respected in the same way, or like, right? So I think those are the complications.
You need the right hat.
Sorry.
You just need the right hat.
Please no.
Did you ask the last question, or do we have more time? Oh yeah, we have time.
Well, the last question is building on the book you're doing, Last Artist Standing.
We just talked about it.
We talked about it, but we didn't really go very deep. Do you see ageism in this for art world? And how can we as women artists and practitioners counter age discrimination? Is it even possible? I mean, I say is it possible because I think one of the difficulties I find in the art world is there's a lot of rules don't apply. right? Like the idea that somebody, like that a biography of an artist has to be about age or can't be about age because somebody doesn't want to address it, which I think is their right. I think that it's complicated because ageism on the one hand, we can see it being valued and revered in the work of Adrian Piper or Martha Wilson, but they're at a level where that's, we respect their work. So do you think there's ageism? Is that something that we're spanning, I think, like, we're all around the same generation. Yeah, so talk about it. Where does it come up and how does it?
I mean, I can tell you one example, for example, which was this residency program that I was participating in some, like, the final rounds of choosing people who applied for it, and there was one person that I was like so excited about her being like an applicant, and I was like, we need her, like she's been amazing, she's been so influential in this world, and like if she's in this space, she's just gonna change this dynamic. And like the rest of the people who were in the jury were like, no, like she's like old, it will like change the dynamic, like we're like trying to get like, young artists. I'm like, wait, but last round you have these like two older men, and like you didn't think that's a problem, like now this has become like a problem, so like you just run into examples like that with like women, and the fact that then that becomes a problem. But also, I don't know, I'm 32, so I don't know how I'm gonna feel about all this in like 20, 30 years, but I do think it's something that is gonna I'm gonna start thinking about it in a very different way as I age, because it is real. And it's gonna become something that I get more concerned about probably. So for real.
Yes.
Ageism is real.
Mid-career, middle age, in between, non-visible space, where yes, we've emerged, and we've done as best as we can and are emerging into the world. And so then it's like, how do I stay and sustain and still have my ambition in this gray zone? That's my strategy, because the world is not going to pay attention to me for the next 60 years. Right. That's my strategy. How do I keep myself living, sustaining, healthy, so that they can give me like 100 a year? Oh, she's still alive, retrospective. And she never got any support in her 70 years with her mid-career, and she was really a star. We just discovered her. Discovery is the word. I'm waiting for that moment when it's 100. Don't wait for that. I have strategized. Okay, so I have to live.
Zone. We're in the same zone. I know that
company.
Literally, so I have students who are younger, obviously, right? We're doing very well, and I would never, begrudge that. But valuation between my students' work is more than mine. I just found out today. I was on Sotheby's earlier.
Oh, like their level of market value.
Yeah, the literal market value, because of being young and fresh, and the ideas are great. I wouldn't compare the work. It's like apples and oranges in so many ways. But this is a culture that wants the younger, better, newer thing. And I've also witnessed really recently from student to student, not even that far of a generation gap between artists doing the same exact work from the same exact school with a 5-year difference, and this new person becoming the new one of that version being really hot, right? So there is this young thing, and the old thing, I see that too, but that's because people are finally being recognized. And we had this conversation today about Ruth Asamba and how grateful we are that she's finally getting her due. But and I thought about that on the way here with the questions. People should get their due when they're alive, and maybe we'll get there. And that's about imagination and invention and empathy and research and knowledge, and not just being trendy. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
But I think it also has to do with, value. You know, it has to do with how we value people, the artists.
And how we value ourselves.
How we value ourselves, absolutely.
Especially with women, because we really do think we're not worth it. I mean,
No question about it. Today, I do this, is Susie still here? I thought I saw her, but from Creative Capital, she's the head of Creative Capital, and she can help me with back me up. But the thing is that I talked to somebody today for the work I did for Creative Capital, and this woman who was in her early 60s, and she phrased questions to me like, okay, how do I enter in the art world being this age? So she wasn't even thinking about her work. She wasn't thinking about her history. She wasn't thinking about her assets. She didn't even know what her assets were. She was just thinking about her age being an obstacle to get over first. Sad. It's very sad. And so I think that younger people are not aware of their age. They don't think about their age. They don't think about their age going into the art world or being artists. They just do their work, right? So that self-defeating notion and that pause is a problem.
more risk.
Say again?
More risk.
Yeah, right. Right. Also, as we get older, less risk-taking maybe, perhaps, or maybe we should be more. But I'm turning 53 on Monday, and I'm proud that I've lasted this long in the art world. I mean, that's what I think a measure of success. Right. That how long you sustain your creative life. There's some value to that, and that's where I think that has to change. That mentality has to change. So, and also not being afraid of anything. I don't care, anymore. That's the best asset of age too, is not caring as much, and to be able to speak up and say, and I know Jean is major on this, and to say things that are incorrect or should be corrected, as we see should be right. That's what I think.
Yeah, but also, like, one last thing I want to say is that the whole thing with ageism, with women, it has a very long history also, right? I mean, I'm doing this whole research right now on these kind of like female genie or like dark goddesses or monstrous figures, all from the Middle East, that I'm finding different like narrative and myth, like these are all old texts from the Middle East. And one thing that is like obviously like very common is that as soon as a lot of these female figures become kind of like cruel and negative, they're always old, right? I mean, there's a whole thing with witches are always old. And you don't see that with like men, right? in like figures that are from old stories and art. So I think it has a very actually long history of like how age and women have been perceived in society. And it's something that, I mean, like at least in this research I'm doing, I'm calling it refiguring as activism, feminism practice, but something that I'm doing a lot of research on it, and it always comes up. And then all the like seductive like women are like the ones that are like young, obviously. So yeah.
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? It also has to do with radicalizing our history. Taking the Jansen books, cutting them up, and putting women in, and men and women of color in those books. So it has to be redirected. I think that's what really has to happen physically too. I think somebody is doing that. I found an artist told me in Australia is actually doing that.
But like also this is what I'm like thinking about as like to reimagine the future, you have to reimagine the past, right? And that's what I'm interested in. Like if you would go and reimagine the past and how these things were presented, and then turn this power dynamic against the very powers that are oppressing them, then like you can then reimagine other futures.
That's kind of what you were saying about envisioning multiple futures, right? So you can re-envision that past towards the future.
I want to follow up on your thing about ageism and selections. Multi-generational in any arts community is the importance. And so we have models of people who are older, and who can, in some way I feel lucky that I'm part of the immigrant population because we struggled and we don't take things for granted, and we can live off very, very little because we don't assume it's ours, to take. So in many ways, I feel like those challenges that I have had all through my life, and people of my family have had, it's something that will help me, when people aren't paying attention and I have less resources to go on. I can still survive. I know I can, So I sort of feel like for me, I've had models. Now I imagine someone who's a middle-aged man, who's been very easy in their life and has moved along, and then suddenly they find, what's happened? And I feel like they don't have not had the challenges that we've had to survive, you know, and not only survive, but thrive, you know. So I feel like, you know, witnessing, speaking, and being in dialogue with many generations of artists. So I'm really excited about your next book, you know, because that insight, you know, that's what's going to keep us going, to hear those stories. You know, how have you survived all this and sustained and thrived?
3 generations.
Should we open it up to questions? Are there questions from the audience? Oh, there's a Christian. Christian.
I can just listen. I have a question about the Women's March. So what would it take to get a more diverse group there? Whose fault is it, so to speak?
For me,
Anybody.
I mean, I think some of the commentary I was reading about, and I don't know, there was an article that a cousin of mine posted on Facebook, you know, about not being able to go to the march because of childcare. People have obligations, and women in particular have obligations in society that are fairly invisible. So that can hold people back from participating in something like a march, which, if you look at a certain economic spectrum, it's traveling to Washington, D.C. with my children in a comfortable way would be considered a luxury. I don't have children, but yeah, children might be luxury too.
the focus,
Yeah,
maybe.
right.
I think, and I can't make a broad generalization, one, it was a rainy, cold day, that was true. Two, some people weren't clear on what was that about, really.
You mean the march
It's like,
itself?
yeah, it's a show of force, and when it happened, as opposed to some kind of more strategic, like at the 100-day mark, like now, you know. And then there were some people reeling over the percentage of people that voted for Trump that were white women.
Right.
So it was like the other 49% that marched, and there was the 51% that voted. Is that how?
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really know. I think people are motivated by causes, and I think there was a lot of camaraderie that was going on with that march, which is great, and I have friends that went, and I feel empowered by that, but I wasn't compelled to go. And I don't think that makes me...
Why?
I didn't know what it was for, except to show up. There wasn't anything we were marching for.
Like, was there a specific
Like,
change?
to make something happen.
Yeah.
There's no platform, there's no, like, legislation. The next steps, I don't even know what the next steps are, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's why. I marched on Washington for pro-choice in, what was that, the late 80s. And that was a big women's march, and it was all inclusive.
I was there too.
Yeah.
Also,
We all went in our school buses from school, provided the school buses.
but also,
We did.
imagine it's like Trump has just been elected. Is it safe to be out? I mean, that's a concern for a lot of people of different backgrounds, of different orientations in the world. It's like, is this going to be a safe space for me to participate? Is it about me? So I mean, there is...
And for brown people especially, when, you know, what happened to Sandra Bland scared the shit out of me. I live upstate, I live in the county. You start looking at people differently. You start driving much more carefully. You know, like, you don't want to, like, move from the stop sign too fast. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, people of color might not, you know, be so celebratory to get together in that way. And when we do, it is also politicized. One of us said that, when you said it. When there are more brown bodies in the room, there's a different conversation going on. And that's not even, like, meant to be. It's how the society views groups of brown people when they get together as threatening, as aggressive. It's very different.
I mean, even from the very beginning when the march was organized, right? I mean, there's a whole backlash because the way the naming. Remember that? Like, there was a whole thing around the naming going.
Oh, right. It was like it was connected to the million
Yes.
I don't know if it was women's or men's march, but.
So from the very
In the
beginning,
90s,
it was
yeah.
just like a kind of like a backlash because of like how the naming was like, and the organization
Appropriating.
was all from
Yeah.
like women who were like white. And so then they're like, oh, you're all, like already from like the very beginning excluding or like using this thing from like a background and history that used to be for Black people, and then like organizing this march that is being organized by like these like white women. So from the very beginning there was this kind of a conversation, and I think that's, you just like in some ways feel excluded from the very beginning, and then it's like, yeah, I think the class division is a real thing though, right? If you have like children and you can't afford to get, I don't know, like childcare or like someone to look after them, if you have a job you have to go to, you can't just like avoid it. Like those things are real things, and I think that always becomes part of this stuff that people maybe forget when they don't have those situations.
I think though the J20 strike though, just to go from the Women's March to the J20 strike, I think that was really important as a collective for the art world. So, and then it just, there was some division as to who was going to strike and who wasn't. And it said a lot. It created a lot of conversation. And I think in that way, for our own community, that was very good, because it was good information to go forward and then cause more conversation. The Women's March, I felt like I wasn't sure what that was going to do after. Like what was I think it's always good when people want to say something and freely express themselves. There's no question about it as a collective. But I think that I'm more interested in action to do something with it. And that day, I didn't go out because we were installing. I had this big commission, and so I couldn't go out and do it. But for the inauguration, I did strike that day. And I do think that this is a different era and that we can all participate no matter what. It should be open to everyone to do that.
And I was just going to add maybe just that choice. And for me, going and traveling to Washington, D.C. and making huge sacrifices to be part of that, though it seemed great if you needed to make those choices, for me wasn't something I wanted to even consider. But at the day came in New York, I was already hitting the ground doing stuff. I mean, I was busy, I sort of feel like through education, you have different channels in which you can make an effect immediately. So I was busy doing that, and so I didn't want to take away from that to go be with this whole national movement. But I felt the groundswell as well for people who really felt helpless, that to them showing up, going was so important to them. So I knew many of my friends who did. And for them, that was a choice that they wanted to make. And for me, it was like, it wasn't even a choice, I wasn't gonna go. But in New York, I was like, well, I know friends who are gonna go, and it made sense to them. It made sense for me to come together, right, and make a one-day sacrifice. And it felt exhilarating, right? But then I was back to work, doing the things I do that I know that can have effect, and it can be much more direct. But I felt really bad for many people, women who just were devastated. Generations of my students who were devastated. And so they needed to be visible. They needed their anger to be channeled in a way to make themselves visible. And I think there was like healing in that, right? And it was very therapeutic.
I mean, there's
in
always
that way.
healing in protest in that way. Yeah. Right? But one question I wanted to say is that with the same people, which was most of the crowd, were again like women who were like mostly like middle-aged, would the same people show up to the next Black Lives Matter protest? That's my question, right? Like they got to like put together this like huge thing, and it was like all over the news, and it got like so many, there was like no violence. Would the same people go to the next Black Lives Matter? Like would stand in the same way that they were standing for this like cause? So
that same thought occurred to me as well. But the other thing that occurs to me is because I campaigned and I canvassed, and how many of the people who were there were actually campaigning on the ground, that like after the outcome to like go to be bad. But I don't want to judge anybody. I'm just talking about like the movement. It's not a movement, but it was a march, and it's over. And he's still, Black Mirrors or whatever. You know, he's still
I have
there.
a question from Savannah.
No, it's not a question, it's a couple of comments. So, one, to answer that gentleman's question, no, I didn't go to the march either, because it has gotten to be, just commonplace to have marches nowadays. They don't really bring about change. It's just a moment, and you might release some energy, but nothing is going to happen because of the march. That's easy. The hard part is afterwards, which I want to address to the panel. And what I wanted to say to you, I did enjoy the panel. I learned some things. I want to meet with some of you afterwards. But the truth of the matter is, women need to learn to talk with each other now more. We need to care about each other more. We need to eat together. We need to hang together. We need to know each other, get involved in each other's lives, because things have not improved that much. Okay, particularly for women of color. Most women of color who engage in art, I mean, I'm sorry, most of us struggle. We don't have husbands, we don't have families because we can't afford it. We're still trying to get our voices heard. And I think it would be helpful if we all learn to just be supportive of each other, dialogue as much as possible, and then the resources be shared. That's what I wanted to say.
That's a very great comment. But you posed a question to the panel as well, in a way, because you said what happens after the march.
Right.
And I think that you're exactly right. We do need to include each other, be in each other's lives, but also invite people to panels, to this, and to anyone who's not of color as well, to engage with people of color and not be afraid to. We have empathy, we have this shared experience, we're all human, and it's not really easy being a human being. And, I know it can be like, how do I engage in this conversation without sounding ignorant or sounding racist or, whatever, it's like all these trigger things, but we should all dialogue with each other and get engaged in our local politics.
Yes.
It's one thing to complain about it, and it's one thing to talk about it. It's a whole other thing. There are these legislators in every one of our little neighborhoods and towns who are doing things. And if we run for office, if we put forth our own candidates and things like that, starting at the base level, because all these decisions got made about our daily lives at the local level that we don't even know.
They're made for us.
They're made for us,
Yeah.
and they're shady, super shady, even on the Democratic side.
So we have two questions here. Can we hear?
So I know that one of the framing questions of this conversation has been about how to create a sustainable relationship with one's practice. But I'm also interested in a question that I think, Sharon, you mentioned briefly, which is the notion of how you create a sustainable relationship with your community. And we've talked a little bit about the arts community, we've talked a little bit about the market, but I'm very much interested in, as a panel of women of color, how you create a relationship with your own communities of color, potentially of women. And I say this, I am executive director of an organization called Cool Culture, and we provide 50,000 families with free admission to 90 museums, and often what they see on the walls and their knowledge of artists does not reflect people that look like them. And so I'm just wondering about your outreach to communities. How do you engage? Is that sort of part of your practice, given that as women you are so stretched?
Okay. How do I do that? In so many different ways that whenever possible, I guess. When I have an exhibition, there's always an education component. Some artists don't like to do that. I didn't know that. I like to work with kids, and so I work with various programs with any institution. I say that at the outset. In Nashville, they have, there's an arts organization that works with homeless artists, and they merged groups so that then there was like young girls, and there was everyone together. I also teach, and I guess that's basically it. Any way possible. It is a labor blow because it's not anything that's going to pay the bills per se, but it's important because I think everyone should be included in the conversation of creativity. And I know how inspiring it was to me when I was little and artists came and talked to me and worked with me.
I might sort of extend that conversation that in my work, and that's central, is that I use the community in some way to have a dialogue with me from the beginning of creating work. So they're part of the creative process. And so through education, because I am an educator, I sort of use that platform that I'm not just the artist, the creator, but I'm here to talk about arts making and make art with them. It is my show, it is my work, but whether it's a material exchange that I'll have locally, or literally right now, there's a production of my work happening at the Figge Art Museum in Iowa. And it's a community I don't know, but they invited me to have a show, and I said, okay, so let's open up the community process, So they're not commissioning my work per se, we're collaborating, making the work together. So they're, and all their educators are working really, really hard, the curatorial staff is to tap as far as they can, to their museum audience and making my work. So I feel like in some ways, I'm sharing resources, right? It's a labor-intensive work that I could be taking on, but it would stretch me too thin. But instead of making that my problem, I say, well, I'm inviting you to labor in the struggle and the challenges of making art, but also the joy, which is that you get to take one part of something that's much more broad and collectively we get to make this work together. But I've done the hard part, kind of conceiving and the logistics, the systems at work that need to be happening, because we're all sort of siloed, right? They could be making art by themselves, but they choose not to, right? Because they have other struggles. And I'm like, and I could be an artist just making my work too. But instead, when a museum and an institution gives me the support, I sort of send it backwards, saying, well, let's support our community, galvanizing and making a catalyst to come together to make art. And that's how I do it. So I've tried to be as generous whenever an opportunity comes out to say, how do I own that? But no, let's change that around. Instead of how do we create ownership around this process, the work, and then share our resources that we have so little, right? Because the minute they have the show, they're going to turn and say, so can you do educational programming? I'm like, well, let's not have that conversation after the fact. Let's use the education budget and let's all be educators teaching us about the creative process. And so I've really tried to, again, reinvent how I make work. And that to me is by engaging communities and seeing what they're interested in. And I always tell the museum, if no one's interested, then I'll go and make the work myself. That it's a call to action, but I can't presume that they're interested. So I have to engage them as well. There's got to be the right component. So it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of commitment from everyone to try to realize it. And we don't want to disappoint ourselves, which is kind of a great part of the process.
You talk about your residency too,
My residency? Yes, and I wanted to say two things. I mean, these two words are a bit loaded now, but I so very much believe in them as a practice and as a micro-action practice, which is self-care and self-worth, but also reminding other women and women of color that these two are very important, especially, let's say, in a situation of brown bodies that are now banned and rejected, and so many of my Iranian friends, let's say, since the ban happened, who live in the US, they were going through so many real emotional, mental experiences. Their whole lives changed in so many ways since Trump came to power. And so building that kind of space, a space that we can be there for each other and in a daily life experience, help each other figuring this stuff out. That's one thing. And also, community building, but in a way that is practical. One of the things I want to do this year for Ida Lovelace, the anniversary, that is birthday that always gets celebrated, because she's very important in the world of being a pioneer in the world of technology, and as a mathematician at computer science. And so I'm like making a list of women of color who are in the world of technology, because I feel like there's always a lack of that list. People are like, who should I invite? Do you know anyone? Like, do you know anyone I should reach out? And I'm like, there's so many people. We just need to make these like names known because they're invisible and hidden. So that kind of activism, and I think these are like little things you do, little actions, but at the same time they can go a long way because it's something that maybe is not practiced as much, or is not. It's like a good way to be able to support each other and share resources.
Can I mention? So all three of them, they talk about that in their essays. But this book, that's what it's about. I'm not selling you one, I'm just telling you that was a big influence for me. So, like Edgar Arsenault started Watts House Project. He talks all about it. He has the longest essay in this book. Zoe Charlton, who I just saw in Washington, D.C., works with Tim Dowd, and they took American University and turned it upside down and started reaching out to museums all over the Washington, Baltimore area. And now they have partnerships without AU even knowing about it. And they finally caught on to it. But like Hal Sabsabi, who's in Australia, I'm just trying to make sure I get everybody. And Pee Wee Roldan, who actually in 1986, because he created a collective, he contributed to the takedown of the regime in 1986 in the Philippines. This has been happening for a long time. So, I mean, my job is to bring them forward as examples, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm proud and grateful to do that. But it's happening a lot. And I really do believe it is. I mean, I can give you my research, at least go through it and share it with you. But it might take me some time to collect that in an organized way. But I can certainly point out people that are actively doing it in the most humble, generous way because it's natural to them.
Alana, did you want to ask?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to share a few thoughts and sort of ask a question. These are recurring thoughts throughout. That I think the model of scarcity, of thinking of resources as in terms of scarcity, is somewhat of a barrier to productivity, and in some ways is also a kind of a construct that's imposed. Because on the one hand, I mean, it's not a pie, with so many pieces. And I think that the resources that really do exist in the world are basically limitless if you can access them. But more importantly, that generosity and help to giving generously to others, whether it's like among friends or within institutions, does not take anything away from you. It's not like you're competing for the same crime.
Exactly.
Right? It only creates a healthier situation. And, and I think that what you, as a group, are reflecting in your positivity is your refusal to be a victim, and whether that's something, a mindset that some people are born with, and also product of experience and age. And so, one of the advantages perhaps of getting a little bit older, just like coming to terms with that dynamic, because being in the place of the victim is never productive. I mean, I'm generalizing. But then Shinique, and I'm hoping you can find questions, just like you did so generously to what somebody else said. But when you were talking about doing outreach, I'm wondering if the galleries you work with, like the commercial galleries you work with, can be influenced to support that.
And they do.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
And they do.
it through
There's
your galleries?
talks happen, special groups of kids and other
Because that's
groups
changing.
around the community. Yeah, that's changing.
That's influencing power, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying that's a form of change in itself, like that promotes change.
Well, I mean, I was just curious, because when you were talking about it,
I think a lot of institutions
either just by yourself or whether you're able, you can get the galleries to do that. Then.
Both. And I also see other institutions who you wouldn't expect doing outreach. I was at Sotheby's today with Eric Schneider, who's there now, and he's also on the board of the Lower East Side Girls Club. And they bring groups to Sotheby's, has groups come off and on all the time, because even though it's an auction house, they treat it like a museum, and I didn't know that. So I think there are a lot of people who are making efforts that we wouldn't see on the surface. And it just needs to be more. And if you don't see it happening at an institution, I could go and propose even to an institution I don't really work with.
Too about you, that one of the reasons why I wanted Shinique to be in this book is you're naturally generous, and you really do recommend. Shinique recommends artists when you see that there can be a fit, and that I think that, and you talk to galleries about artists and institutions.
If it feels natural,
right,
you should do that. I mean, right now, people recommend each other and mention each other and stuff, but sometimes people are like, oh, well, I shouldn't do that because I don't want to give away that resource.
Yeah, no.
Or something like that. But it's,
It's hard to realize you can't do, there's only so much you can do at once.
Yeah.
So those resources they have to be shared.
But I think
it's not realistic, right, to take it all on for yourself.
I mean, if you have an opportunity, you should share it. I really believe that. It's really important to do that. And I think having access to a gallery, that's an immediate opportunity to share. And I think every artist should do that. Yeah?
But I also think that burden shouldn't be put on us always.
I agree.
Because it's like, okay, you want to support other people, other women of color, other whatever, then you're like sharing these resources when you're always also struggling to have those resources, and just like why that burden is always put on us. Like,
It's true.
Encourage actually other people who get those resources easier to do the same thing. I think that is equally important, because it's very easy to then always have these kind of like, I want to be the community and I want to be generous, and then you're always like sharing, and then you create this comfort for like these like other people who don't feel that they should also participate in this. And it's the same with like everything else, like being in a panel and being the one that has a big mouth, so like always like say things and respond to things, and you get tired of it, I'm just like, I can't wait to go to a panel and then it's like not equal and there would be the non-person of color speaking out. I can't wait for that day when that becomes the normal. And I want to see that world. So, yeah.
We're almost done. Okay, should we finish?
Is there one more question? Yeah.
No, it's not really a question. It's sort of a pushback on the idea that protests don't work and that marches don't work. There's been a lot of effective change since we started the resistance, right? Including the Muslim ban, which is still in place, the pushback against the Affordable Care Act, et cetera, et cetera. In particular, since the Women's March, there's over 12,000 women contacting Emily's List. If you don't know Emily's List, you should know about it, support it. Supporting pro-choice women getting elected to office. It's like 1,000% increase. That would not have happened without the Women's March. So
That's a good point. Yeah.
it's creating something. Don't give up. The last thing I'll say is I'll always remember being schooled by an older musician friend of mine in the resistance movement for many years, protest movement. He's like, listen, the reality of this stuff is you fight, you lose, you fight, you lose, you fight, you lose, you fight, you win one. Start over.
I agree. That's my husband. He's been like a political activist and jazz musician. So Sarah, before I leave, I just want to point out another contributor from my second book is Brett Wallace. He's right here, so he can talk to people too, and you'll sign votes, right? Oh, is there another question? Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was.
Was somebody?
Well, I guess I just wanted to chime in as someone who did go to the Women's March with my daughter, friend, that there does seem to be this really casual ageism, and it got mentioned again here. Oh, it was all those fat old white ladies. And I feel like it's sort of, there's this creeping thing that was also part of Hillary's demise, that it's really easy. We have millions of targets, but one of those is, as white women, where is it okay? You know, I know everyone goes, oh yeah, well, why aren't you in Ferguson? Well, that's also an important goal, but and you sort of touched on it of saying, well, we're always asked to give, and we're giving, and then it's like, yeah, but you're kind of old and you're a little overweight, and you know, you're kind of embarrassing with those stupid pink hats. But I found it incredibly powerful to be with these busloads of women who are farmers' wives from Utah. Like, they'd never come to a march in Washington before, and hundreds of thousands of women went, holy shit, I'm sorry, we're not professional organizers, we don't have our agenda yet set. We want this fucking guy, and you know, on the day after his election, we want to be there to show. Here, it's like, my daughter's a grown-up, and she organized the bus.
Right.
So I'm with a bunch of young people, and there weren't a lot of people with strollers, but and the fact that, you know, I couldn't wear one of those pink hats, but Trump could never claim that that crowd was his inauguration crowd, because if you look down, it was all pink. So it always will be, you know, otherwise it would get fudged into other things. So I just...
March had a lot more diversity.
Right, and then there were women of color who were marching and going, oh, you guys don't like your pumpkin latte. And I'm like, I don't know that this is a moment to be being, I mean, I'm just saddened that it seems like it's a really divisive issue, and it's an embarrassment.
Nobody was ragging on the march. We were asked the question of why do you think it wasn't as diverse? And why did you not go? So I said why I didn't go. So I wasn't ragging on it. I don't think it wasn't a powerful thing to do, or I don't think it wasn't a huge, powerful statement, but it wasn't diverse, and that's why. And, you know, we weren't ragging on it. And like I said, there were a lot of people that I know who went, and it was very empowering. And I saved the New York Times with all the pink hats. They seem silly at first until you see the picture. I get that. But at the same time, it's not fixed. It hasn't fixed it yet, you know.
Yeah,
And there are other things that still need to be fixed.
You think that is, like, let's say here in this panel we criticize this, then like it's like against something, like rather than, you know what I mean? Like, I think that is the comfort
Well,
zone,
everyone,
maybe, like,
you know, it's been sort of ridiculed universally, and I feel like this one would hope would be people that were allies,
but
it's not. It's like, no, we have nothing.
I see that point, but
as well as being an ally. Right? It doesn't mean you're not aligned with something.
But also, like, I think I have a problem with the fact that you have a problem with we being critical about that. Because I think that's when we progress. And if like we're just always like, oh, this is like really great, and like look how like nice and sweet this thing is, and we have like come together, we have missed points in that space then. And I think that criticality is important.
As long as it's not dismissive.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely,
dismissive, but what you said about the
hopefully it's
pumpkin spice
constructive.
latte was dismissive of people being critical of the march, and we all have a right to be.
May I just real quick, just I think you mentioned it earlier, and I think for every group that's represented in this room, probably that would have wanted to just scream hell no the day after the election. It's definitely the best time in America to be any one of us, right? And the recoil that we're fighting is that Trump represents the no, right? The threat of not being, not always feeling your position, whatever you view that position as, not always having that in place, right? And that argument is really easy to sell because no is a complete sentence, right? So yes isn't a complete sentence because all of us, right? Yes, but we still have, you know, a different follow-up at the end of that. So how do we tie, like how do you put into a message, into the art, that will spread into the culture, that will turn into something, the unifying of all the yeses, the fight is no? Because the different sentences is how that no wins all the time. As soon as you get into an argument, that's it, you're done. Because all you gotta say is, I just got no, let's go. let's get them out of here. They don't want that. They say no. How do you get everybody to have, yes, I thought I heard some of it. I thought I wasn't going to ask the questions. I thought the answer was participate and engage. But how do you really sell that daily, every day?
But I think it goes back to what all of the panelists are saying about figuring out how to change the playing field, figuring out how to create different kinds of opportunities for ourselves and for others. Listening, care. I mean, there have been a lot of yeses. I'm not sure if I get the yes-no binary, but that you're proposing, but I think there are lots of possibilities presented on this panel that I think address what you're talking about. Janet has the microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that about the march. I'm old enough to have participated in the anti-Vietnam protests. Nobody ever stands up and says, oh my God, you've changed my mind. This is a long, slow process. The fact that, I mean, if all of the people who went to the march had voted, then we would be in a different situation.
Exactly.
But it's for us to all support each other in whichever way we can come out and do it, from the indivisible groups to get involved and stay involved, because we have critical work to do together. And so it's not about that didn't work. Nothing works in itself.
Right.
It's the fact that happened the day after the inauguration was really, I think was really important. And it gave permission and it gave energy to all the rest of it. You know, I went to the airport when on that cold night the Muslim ban was announced, and I stood up, I've been standing, you know, I went and unwelcomed Trump to the Intrepid the other week. So, but whatever you can do, that was actually the most satisfying. Was like, he went by, I saw the motorcade, and I know he saw us, and I know he heard us. I know that.
So maybe I'll say that maybe no is a sentence, right? But maybe yes is a process.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
One thing about, I'm rhyming with a couple other people saying, I think it's important to recognize your natural allies, even if they're not 100% congruent with who you are in terms of your own position, self-definition, a million ways of gender, race, color, whatever. That it's important to recognize, and that wasn't recognized during the election, which is why we have the president we have. And I mean, it's heartbreaking that so many people on the left, liberal left, couldn't bring themselves wholeheartedly to support Hillary because she didn't do everything. And I think it's that same kind of striation, unnecessary striations between I can't support you because you really aren't totally.
You're everything to me.
Right.
But that's not.
No, but I'm just saying there has to be a feeling that there is an alliance that goes beyond very specific and immutable criteria. It has to be recognizing who your allies are, even if you normally would, you know.
Yeah, we do.
Well, I was just going to say really quickly, back in the 80s, I was at Columbia and did my journalism master's project on ACT UP. And one of the things that I learned so deeply from ACT UP is that these protests matter. And they actually really do affect change. But also this sort of holy dissension. Their meetings were amazing because it was community coming together. I think that's part of what made it so effective. But there was dissension, there was rawness, and out of that came this amazingly powerful bond. Because what unified everyone was so much greater than any of the kinds of difference. And I learned this also from Simon Sinek, who's done this really great TED Talk on Start With Why.
Who is that?
Simon Sinek. He's done a really great TED Talk on Start With Why, so lead with your values. But the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of ACT UP was that, I mean, and I think this discussion tonight is a really great example of it, you know, in terms of all the ideas. We want all the agents to be out here. We can't afford any less, I don't know. But ACT UP, what they also did was they recognized that you had the protesters who they literally, a couple of people, I think it was Peter Staley talked about as being shock troops. They were the ones who got out there and everybody paid attention to it. Then you had a committee that was working with the FDA Then you had another committee that might be doing something else, another committee that was working on women's issues. So people would go toward their natural interests, but they also recognized that they were all part of a whole, that was all of them were moving everything together. With a lot of unholy dissension, too.
Unholy dissension.
Or holy dissension.
Holy dissension. Let's end with holy dissension.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Jean.